How we going, everybody? Now, we're just filming this straight after the Werribee Heritage Fruit Tree Festival that we had on earlier on today. And I had a lot of customers coming up to me, or patrons, gardeners, who are asking about soil and what it is about soil that we need to look after. Well, I thought I'm going to do a quick topic on it. This is one of the raised beds that we filled in earlier in springtime, where we did a workshop on vegetable garden workshop, and this was full to the top. And as the patrons who remember who came along, they all filled it with me, and you can see we're down to half. So it's disappeared. Now, for those who haven't seen me fill a raised garden bed before, I put straw at the bottom. You can put cocoa pith afterwards and compost, and then on top of that, our planting mix and straw again. And then we activate it with our biostimulants like our Eco Butch and Liquid Gold. Now, some of the problems that I encountered through the growing season, in particular with my tomatoes, was getting all the heads, where all the leaves on top were curling over and shriveling. And it's something that I've seen once in the past or twice happen to seedlings and flowering plants like roses that had a similar problem with the new growth coming through, having that occur to them, like this little curly leaf top. Now, I did some research on it. I did a lot of research on it. I actually even sent samples of the tomato leaves in to get tested from the bottom leaves and the top leaves, because the bottom leaves, as the plant started to develop, was opening up normally again. They weren't curling over like this, but this is from the new growth on top of this plant here. Now, we went through the soil analysis as well. I was paranoid thinking our soil, there was something contaminating in our soil. So I sent samples of the soil, different batches, and did all sorts of trials on it, and it all came back with ticks. Nothing wrong with it. So we've eliminated the soil being the problem. And for example, next door here, and don't mind that I'm not training these tomatoes. As I said, I do a lot of trials here, and I use that as an excuse, meaning that I can't get out here often enough. But nevertheless, these tomatoes haven't been tied up and they're leaning over, but you can see a nice healthy basil here. You can see the parsley's doing well. The eggplant's going for gold there, and it's the same blend. I haven't watered today, and let's have a look underneath here. This is the bed underneath. It's moist. Look at that, handful of worms. See the worms? Full, chock-a-block. Plenty of moisture underneath there, and it hasn't had a water for about a day and a half, almost 2 days. And that's because of the moss. So it's not the soil, it wasn't the planting mix, it wasn't the plants, because the seedlings, I've planted similar seedlings everywhere else, and you can see these plants are okay. They're still getting a little bit of curl on top. See that? See that curl that happens there? But then as it matures, the leaves open up. There's a little bit pulling in on the sides, but again, this is all weather beaten around. Here's a leaf that's nice and clean. That's the old leaf. That's what happens. They clean up. And I'm sure some of you may have experienced a similar problem and just brushed it off and thinking it may have been a virus. This isn't the curly top virus. That's just an old leaf. But it's happening to the top of these leaves. So what's causing it? Well, have a listen to this. Well, before I go on to it, my disclaimer here is that I'm just a humble gardener, and I do a lot of gardening and enjoying it, and a lot of research, and this is my humble theory to what I think is happening. And I haven't fact-checked it, but I know there's a lot of data out there that may prove me right, and some may try and say that I'm wrong in this. Now, I spoke about this with my good mate Craig Castry, who's doing a lot of research himself, in fact, and I'm sort of noticing it in the real time, not doing the data research, but more so the physical hands-on exploration and seeing what I can and not do, and what reacts to the plant to cause it to do that. Now, you know, as I mentioned earlier, years ago when we had the garden centre, we had batches of standard roses coming in, even some fruit trees and seedlings. They were all showing that little bit of, it looks like a curly top virus, but it was happening on the roses where they were growing out like spider legs, the leaves that is. They weren't actually forming in their full shape. And we did the research, we did a lot of asking around, and we come to realise that some growers, and I'm not saying growers do this, all growers, there were some growers then who were actually trying to bring on the dormancy phase in their roses to go to sleep, in other words, by spraying them so they can dig them up and get them out as bare rooted and bagged or whatever they do, but by spraying them with a glyphosate-based herbicide, giving them a very light solution. And that was sprayed directly on the plant, knocking the leaves off, not enough to kill the plant, and therefore it goes into a dormant stage prematurely. They dig it up and they buy it and sell it and so on, and you get it in your garden. And if your plant starts to grow these legs, well, you come back and complain to the garden centres, which what they did back then to us, and that's how we found out what was going on, unbeknown to us until then. but I don't spray Roundup here, so there's no Roundup spraying going on in my garden. As you all know, I don't use chemicals or synthetic fertilizers, all that stuff. Before I tell you what I think's going on, let's have a look at the soil under here, okay? This is the same soil, the same preparation in there. The only thing I didn't do here was to water it enough and keep it hydrated. It is really dirt dry underneath, hence why the tomatoes that were growing in here have died off. Now, where are the worms? This is why you can have the best soil in the world, folks. And if there's no water, anything that's living in there will eventually die, down to the last microbe. That's right, and the worms have disappeared. I'm going to go down for gold here, see if I can find anything down below. And this has really gone hard. Wow. It's when you turn your back on a garden bed and you think, oh, I'll deal with it later on. And when you come to deal with it, you left it for too long a period and everything's gone bloody hard. And I'm using the smallest of trowels here to dig a hole, I know. I wasn't expecting it to be so hard. So, real time. As you can tell, let's explore it, see what we find under here. All right, and you're wondering why it's so dry. Well, the tomatoes were really in a bad state, and I thought, you know what, I'm not going to waste my water on this garden bed. And that's the wrong thing to do, in fact. You should water your garden bed because the soil is alive. Microbes, bacteria, fungi, worms, and all other composting creatures live in here. And if you let it dry out, well, there's no transfer of moisture and nutrients that's going to occur. And what's going to happen? It's all going to shrink, and they're going to move on to another place or just wither away and die. Now, I've hit the straw underneath. Little bit of moisture in there. I've hit the bottom. That's it. So you can see how the soil's gone through it. See the mulch underneath there? It's completely compacted. Well, there'll be something living in here, but not a hell of a lot. So we're going to try and reactivate this again. I'm just going to backfill this now. I'm going to hydrate this before we do anything on top. And I need to soak it really well. So while I'm soaking this, folks, and trying to expand the old dried out sponge and put some life back into it, again, what you see here is real gardening, folks. I'm not trying to hide anything. I did this purposely. I did let it dry out. I knew I was going to destroy the soil, and I did it purposely so I could see what sort of condition my soil will be in at the end of it if it's allowed to dehydrate. And mind you, it's only been a week and a half, 2 weeks. There's been a couple of times where I've gone in the past and just given a light sprinkle like this to hydrate it, and the plants were doing fine, but then I started to see them really deteriorate. You know, I thought, I'm not going to water them anymore, and I know the soil's going to suffer. I could have pulled them out earlier and just hydrated and planted something new, but I thought, no, not everybody does that. We don't all go out there and actively just pull plants out as soon as we see them decline. We try and save them, we keep adding water to it. But what happens when you don't add water? Well, it shrinks like this. And what happens to the best soils and compost that you use? Well, they dehydrate and the life is taken right out of them. Well, I'm going to reactivate this. This is fine. And look, it is draining really well, so it hasn't become hydrophobic, meaning it's not allowing water to penetrate through. It sinks right in. Look at that. It's going straight through. It's just a thirsty garden bed that's gone into suspense from dehydration. And by hydrating it, we're going to reactivate it, and we're going to top it up later on as well and plant it out. But before we do all that, allow me to go back to my little topic of what I think is going on. I was mentioning the situation to Craig, and we were talking about it, and he said to me, it's glyphosate. I said, it can't be. He goes, it is, it's got to be. And I said, well, in what way? You accusing me of spraying Roundup or whatever you call that stuff out there in the industry, you know, all the different brands, but glyphosate as a base. He goes, no, it's in the air. So, well, look, I know it's in waterways because it's travelled through. That's my discussion with him. He goes, yeah, but it's actually floating. So what we've got in the air, right, because nitrates and nitrogens and all that stuff, well, nitrogen in the air, you've got tons of that hanging over your property. So when we start adding fertilisers that are high in nitrogen, we're actually doing a harm to our soils, our environment. We're adding something that we've already got an overload of, and we should be able to draw down the nitrogen because it's airborne. It's you know, in the moisture aerosol style, where you can draw it back into the earth and store it in. And nutrient cycling is what they call it, I think, where it can stay there with the carbon, and that's because you don't dig. But if you dig, you're always releasing it back out. So nitrogen's in the air. We don't have to add that, hence why I talk about black grit in our fertilisers and activating your soil and putting the life into it. But what else is in the air? Well, he reckons, and he said, and I haven't done the research, and I'm not accusing him of making this up. I think he's done enough research to be able to claim it. that glyphosate is coming and landing in your garden. I go, what? Well, think about it. The farms, and I'm not talking about your next door neighbour, folks. I'm talking about farmland 100, 200, 500 kilometres away from your property. It travels, it's up there, it's airborne, and you think, what's coming down with the rain? Well, what's coming down is very, very fine or light levels of, I've got a puddle here, by the way. I'm just standing and I think I've flooded the unit. Well, we're going to dig up and see if it's still wet. Well, that's telling me it's either draining well or I'm losing all the water down the sides, which I think the second would be more the case because it's shrunken in. So back to the glyphosate. The farmers, they've been educated by X, Y, Z people, and sometimes they've got people from the industry coming out there telling them all about the wonderful fertilisers they should be applying in their garden. Their inputs have gone through the roof 3 times, right? And I'm talking about inputs as far as fertilisers, preparation that's required, investment into getting the growing going and to create the produce they're trying to supply to the stores. So they've gone through the roof, and in return the outputs have actually dropped, right? If I'm wrong, somebody correct me here. So if my theory is correct, inputs have gone through the roof, outputs have come down. You get an agent from one of those fertiliser companies, chemical companies, they'll come out and test your place, and they turn around and say, well, I know prices have gone through the roof, you're just going to have to grow your production line. So if you're on 2,000 square acres of land, you need to go up to 3. So, mass, volume, smaller margins, bigger quantities, and you can make up the difference in losses and your profits. Bullshit, all right? Straight out bullshit. Because if you look at the results at the end of the day, and this is scientifically proven, 99%, I won't say 99, 90%, anywhere from 60 to 90%, let's go with that, of inputs, fertilisers, go to waste. They end up in the sky or in your waterways, right? And along with that is your glyphosate. That ends up in the sky as well. And then because your soil becomes dead, it's dirt, doesn't live, you've released all the carbon, you've released all the nitrogen, and then you've also got the glyphosate becoming airborne. Then you get these really spasmodic days of weather where you get little bursts of rain, and it's just really weird. We all say that. We're all thinking that, aren't we? But no one's really talking about it. So I'll be the frontliner here, mate. Shoot me down first if you can. And then I'm seeing my plants curling over, and I'm seeing plants dying radically for no reason, all in a similar mix. And I'm not saying you get a blanket cover of it, but there are particles in the air of different chemicals that may have otherwise been applied once upon a time in someone's farmland, and they've eroded and evaporated and become airborne, and they've ended up in my garden, your garden, somebody else's garden. You can't see it. So that's why I did the test. My results came back from SWEP. You can look them up. SWEP is the company who did the testing on my tomatoes. They tested all my soils, all our compost. They're fine. The levels are fine. We've seen the results. And I haven't had a curl like this ever in my life on a tomato. And the only time I had it is when I had the garden centre where they were pre-treated. Seeds from a previous plant had been exposed to glyphosate. Tomatoes were roses were lightly sprayed with it to bring on their dormancy, to drop their foliage, and then the following season or year you start to see the damages caused by them. So hence with those tomatoes, I'm not keeping any seed. I've chucked them out, they're on the ground there, they're done. I'm not going to keep anything from those. These ones here, this one here is okay on the top there, and I'm not sure what it's going to do, but it's not really setting any fruit. You've got a couple on that side there. Now, the ones that I've protected the best are on the far side. This year I decided, because I thought my climate's really different to a lot of people. It's really harsh, it's dramatic cold and really just harsh. So I thought I'm going to separate my plants. I'm not going to grow them all together because I had a hunch something's going to go wrong. And I think I was right about what was going on here. So I've kept them over there. That one's more exposed, which is 1, 2, 3 in the far background. And I'm talking about the garden beds in the back. That first one is more exposed to the elements, whereas the other two aren't. And they're a lot better and they're doing well. So do some research. Let me know what you think. Call me crazy, call me whatever you call those hat people. Just call me the crazy, what do they call this? Baseball cap Greek gardener who's lost his mind, if that's what you think. I don't care. But if you think I'm on the money or the mark or something else is going on, I'd love you to share it. I'm curious because it's affecting my garden. Not all of it, but it has, and it shouldn't happen. And I haven't used any chemicals or anything like that to destroy my garden. So, and the seed, it's the same seed all the way around. Another thing I need to mention is also the timing of my planting. These beds across here were all planted pretty much the same time. No, about 3 weeks apart, because we were doing workshops one after the other each week. So we did 1, 2, 3, 4. So these were the first early seasonal plantings that I did, whereas the other side were later. And that's why they're not as bad, I think. So what was in the air at the time I planted here? Well, nobody knows anymore. And I've still got some there. This is what they look like. Come over here. This is what we're talking about. I've allowed them to fall down here. I've allowed it to dry out. You can see it's still struggling, and this is not because of dehydration. It is really curled. It's cupping inwards. It's really weird. See that there? Some people call it curly top. We tested it for that, nothing of the sort. And I might actually send a sample of this, because I mentioned about herbicide damage. I'm going to package some of these leaves. I'm going to hydrate this so that it doesn't die on me. And I'll send them off and get some results, and I'll share them with you. So these leaves will go off. I need about 150 grams of it. I'll give them more than that. I'll get them to test it specifically for herbicide and chemical damage, and then we'll see if it is. And if it isn't that, then I'll retract my claim. And you can call me a crazy nutter. That's okay, because we are all crazy at the end of the day, aren't we? We just don't show it. You know how long I've been holding the hose here. You can just see how long the video's been going on for. So it's got at least 50, 60 litres. 50 litres, I'd say. I won't say 60. But for this size bed, it needs something like 360 litres. And I pretty much think it's going to be still dry underneath there. So let's have a quick look. Yeah, see, it's still dry. It's only cracked. If I could show you here on the side, look, it's barely gone in a centimetre in there. You can see what's happening. So it's not hydrating through yet. It's sucking it through. Let me just do this. So it's soaking through, but by the time I hydrate every little particle on the surface, it's completely dry. It's going to need stacks of water. Stacks of water. Let me just do it over here where I dug a hole. Let's see what's going on in here. I'll just hydrate it a bit more like that. Because some of the other questions were, I'm watering my plants, but they're still dry, they're dying, they look like they're not getting water. Well, they're not. Because look at this hole. This is the hole that I dug. Look, it's fluffy and barely got any moisture. It's not quite soaking through yet. And that's the hole I dug, folks. And that's loose, so the water can get in there like a well. It's going straight through to the bottom, and we're watering the grass underneath here and the weeds outside. And when you dehydrate a garden bed like this, A, it's going to take forever to hydrate, and this is what I've got to go through. B, you've disconnected any living organism in the soil, be it microbes, bacteria or fungi or creatures. As you saw, there were no worms in here, and this bed had the same amount of worms as that bed over there that I just dug up before and showed you a handful of it, and there was at least 2 dozen worms there. So we're going to bring the life back into here, and if you do disconnect them, water's not going to fix it overnight. Literally, it's not going to fix it overnight. This is going to be a long, tedious process, meaning patience, hydration, and then we're going to come back tomorrow's video and we're going to layer it. So for today, if you're doing something like this in your garden bed, don't go running out there and throwing all your favourite planting mix like we have and compost over and layering it without hydrating it. You don't hydrate the base, it's going to take you forever to get that moisture to travel down, seep through, to activate and bring the life back up again. Ooh, look at that, I spotted one. We've got one over here coming out. What's going on here? The wrong type of creatures we don't want. There's one over here, and there's one just here. Yeah? No, that's a leaf. Is that one? That's another leaf. I'm losing my mind. Look at that. It's a little green caterpillar, hey? Now that little fella there will eat his way through, or her way through, all our veggies, lots of leaves and things like that. But look, they're only short-lived too, by the way, and the amount of damage they do is hardly enough to worry about from one caterpillar. If you had 100 of them in the one spot, I'd be worried. But for one caterpillar like that, really just let it photosynthesize. I've lost it. That's it. Shut me down, lock me up, put me in a padded cell, please. What it's going to do is pupate and turn into an adult butterfly and come back and lay more eggs and then cause more damage. So I'm going to let it live out there in a dry area. So tell me, folks, is it something in the air a bit more sinister than we dare to think about or share? Or have I lost my mind? Or is there something else going on with my plants that maybe you've recognised and I haven't picked up on it as yet? Love to hear from you. And if you are going to look after your garden bed, well, watch this little segment we're doing, because the next one after this will show you how to layer your bed and how to bring it back to life again. So hydration first, and I'll see you tomorrow on the next stage. Check out our website, vasilisgarden.com. From me, Vasily, Maresi.